I call the Honourable David Parker in reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank members for their contributions? Can I encourage members to vote for this bill to Select Committee, and can I take the time to deal with some of the issues that have been raised? Before I do that, can I say to the national members that if this bill does pass first reading and goes to Select Committee, why don't you try and make it work rather than try to demolish it? There are many countries that have a minimum rate of remuneration rather than a minimum wage, because if you only have a minimum wage, people can get around it and can abuse the most vulnerable in society by not paying them fairly. And that's all this bill tries to do. It doesn't apply to everyone in society. It applies to a discrete list of occupations where these problems are most prevalent. Mr Clayton Mitchell said that we needed the Zimmer Amendment for people who are over 90 who can't deliver pamphlets fast enough. There are already provisions in the law that say that if people cannot work in a way that would entitle them to, or would enable them to work as people can normally work as a minimum, they can get a special rate of pay. That's already provided, and that's how, for example, we pay people who have a disability lower than the minimum wage if they are of not normal capacity. Mr Speaker, I've already noted that the world's becoming a more ruthless place. Contractors under this bill, contrary to what the last speaker said, this doesn't give contractors a rate of pay that would include holiday pay or sick pay or ACC levies. It just says that the minimum hourly rate could be no lower than the minimum wage. I thought that Clayton Mitchell did raise a good issue in respect of what do you do with this interface with something that's sort of almost volunteering compared with work, like some people who are putting on a Amdram production. Well, of course, if they're just getting recovered their expenses, that's actually not getting paid, so that's not a complication. But if there is a complication around that and it's too hard to fix in this bill, strike that from the list. I'm not actually trying to cure all of the world's problems here, but I am trying to make things better. Mr Speaker, a reference to people who are young people under the age of 16 is mistaken by people. People who are under the age of 16 don't get the minimum wage. This wouldn't change it. So this bill wouldn't affect kids that are out doing milk runs or paper runs. This is aimed at adults who are, through the increasingly competitive and ruthless world that we live in, being abused by being paid less than the minimum wage. Why is that fair? Newspapers compete against people who are selling advertising services. Newspapers are generally large organisations. They actually don't employ people through these arrangements. They're either employing kids or they're employing people properly, paying them the minimum wage. If they're competing against other advertisers who aren't paying the minimum wage, that's not fair to them. It's undermining their competitiveness, and that's just too tough. Mr Speaker, can I deal with one of the speeches earlier that said if someone offers to paint a fence and then it gets washed off in the rain or something, they got to do it again, it takes them twice as long and they drop under the minimum wage. Look, this isn't intended to address that sort of situation. This is intended to address people who are getting around the minimum wage by employing people in something that's similar to a wage, similar to an employment relationship. Now, these sorts of things are more frequent now, in part because the government passed poor legislation relating to the hobbits, where they deemed employment relationships to be contractual relationships, even when they were contractual relationships. Deemed employment relationships to be contractual relationships, even when they were employment relationships, which was bad law. They shouldn't have done that, but they've actually made this problem worse by doing so. I don't know what the outcome of this vote will be, Mr Speaker. I know it will be close. I think this is worthy of consideration with the Select Committee. I don't accept the assertions from the other side that I'm somehow being doctrinaire and trying to drive up the minimum wage. I'm not. I readily concede there is a proper argument to be had as to whether the minimum wage should go up or not. That's a separate argument. This does not increase the minimum wage for everything. It just means that some people in New Zealand who are currently being abused and not even being paid the minimum wage would get it.
Members, the question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no.
No.
The ayes have it. Party vote called for.
A party vote is called for.
New Zealand National.
59 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
32 votes in favour.
Green Party.
14 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
12 votes in favour.
Māori Party.
2 votes in favour.
Act New Zealand.
1 vote opposed.
United Future.
1 vote in favour.
Members, the ayes are 61. The noes are 60. The motion... Sorry, the question is...
Minimum wage.
The motion is agreed to.
Minimum Wage Contractor Remuneration Amendment Bill, first reading.
The question is that the Minimum Wage Contractor Remuneration Amendment Bill be considered by the Transport and Industrial Relations Committee. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. And to the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Congratulations. Hang on. Call on members order of the day number 2.
Local Government Act